Welcome everyone. Today I have Harish Perry, head of marketing at Okta. Real privilege and pleasure to chat with him. Literally before COVID, CISO of JPMC dropped this bomb. Let me just share this on the third party suppliers. So this is becoming a big problem as the supply chains are becoming more digital. They're becoming more and more expansive. So this is the real problems, and one of the problems that's highlighted here is the authentication protocols. So it's a real pleasure to have Harish talk about this. I'll have him introduce, and then we'll get started.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. You're right that this letter was sort of a bomb in the industry. I loved it because it was great to hear, the CISO of one of the world's largest and probably one of the most complex organizations, right? They're moving trillions of dollars daily in payments. To have them really echo back the thing that's been top of mind for us. So I was like, you can't pay for this stuff. This was great that he wrote this. But by introduction, yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm Harish Perry. I run product marketing for all of Okta, and in that role, I spend a lot of time, deep in our product strategy, trying to figure out what's right for our customers and making sure that we are on the cutting edge of things so we can help bring our customers and the industry with us. So yeah, thank you again for the opportunity.
Good. So before this recording, we were chatting about the identity space, right? And you mentioned this really well. Is like identity at its core is an integration issue. Like you have the systems, and some of the systems they have their own identities, like Microsoft AD and others, right? And you need to orchestrate those IDs. So you don't want to create like multiple silos, multiple IDs. So a lot of times it's better to just have like one golden record and then orchestrate that ID, right? And that's where I think the crux of this letter also is, where we are heavily relying on like, modern protocols like oAuth to authenticate. Initially, when Okta started with a single sign-on, I feel like that was like a good orchestration, right? Like you were just orchestrating an AD to a SaaS app, and now what
hmm
is happening is like we are going from like a SaaS to another apps, using the same token, same IDs. So would love to just
Yeah.
understand this, like what are you guys seeing from an Okta perspective? The single sign-on makes sense, like hey, you're just authenticating one app, but now that you have multiple apps in the ecosystems, and a lot of this third-party apps, they feel like it's very easy for them to ride on top of Okta, right? With Auth0, the identity is already there. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's just get started. Right? So they seem to be riding on the shoulder of you. But from your vantage point, what do you guys see and what do you guys recommend?
Sure. Yeah, so to really understand the motivation behind this letter, you have to really unpack the difference between OAuth 1.0 and OAuth 2.0. So when OAuth originally was created around 2006, it was pretty simple. It was about a human authenticating into an app and then getting the grants and the authorization to access stuff. It was basically between a person and a technology. Because back then, I sound like an old guy, but life was simple. It was like human, there were apps, everything was going into the cloud. Okay, what's happened now with OAuth 2.0 is it's really a framework to say, I'm authorizing another app to access another app or resource on my behalf. And that app could also be an AI agent, right? That's something to keep in
Yeah,
mind.
yeah.
Now, in theory, it sounds good, but what happens is because you want a machine, which is basically an app or an agent, to access another machine, which is an app or an agent or resource, that interlock is very different than what OAuth 1.0 was designed for. Because what you end up with is essentially a token that is long lived, that is not properly managed, that sometimes can get hard coded or put into configuration files or something in plain text even that can be accessed. And that right there is what we believe is probably the biggest security gap in our industry right now. Because if you now switch gears and think like a threat actor, like a motivated hacker, people think hacking is a very complicated thing. It's actually quite straightforward. Every hacker is trying to do one thing. They're trying to get in, get escalate privilege, meaning they're trying to turn their session into an admin session, And once they do that, they can start laterally moving around the organization. That's the most common breach pattern that we see. And the way this machine to machine makes it a gold mine is you now have these long-lived, unmanaged tokens that are essentially the master key to every part of the organization. So we're seeing that, like, for a developer, it's great. I can make customer experience really easy. I can allow a human to delegate access to an agent to access other things. It makes the experience great. But because there's so much innovation happening here, what we're seeing is that the security side of it is not being thought of with as much diligence as it should. And that's why the JP Morgan gentleman wrote this to say, hey, we're seeing that I have this whole array of applications in my technology stack. I'm seeing direct connections between them, and that is a problem because I have no idea of knowing what level of privilege that connection allows. I have no idea of knowing how long that token is living. I have no idea of knowing who has access to it. So that then gets into core access management, identity governance, and privileged access are just thrown out the window to make these apps access each other to make life easy for end users. So the benefit is great, but the security risk is enormous, and it's definitely it's something that keeps us up at night. It's a call to action for all app builders, really. So
Yeah.
hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that was a really good point on the tokens, right?
Mhm.
So that's more on the authentication piece, right? What about authorization? And I posted this on LinkedIn, and some folks pointed out that eventually you're supposed to actually go and control the authorization, like the roles and everything on the third party app. Right? Let's just say, you're authenticating a CI/CD app using your GitHub, right? So you can orchestrate my identity as Pramod, but then I have a different controls and different rights on GitHub, and I might have different authorization on the CI/CD. There's also that element that was highlighted in this is a lot of time that authorization actually is not done at all because people are just like, okay, I can just maybe translate the roles and responsibility, but different apps are built differently, the controls are
Yeah,
different.
yeah.
So I wanted to talk about it is, you know, from Okta point of view, when you orchestrate these tokens,
Hmm.
I mean, initially it makes sense like, hey, let's just authenticate and let just get you going. But does it make sense at some point of time, like what you're doing with MFA also, like keeping and
Hmm.
pushing and saying, hey, you need to implement MFA. Does it make sense to really maybe create some friction there and saying, hey, look, okay, you got in, you tried that app, you did a POC, but if you're really putting this in production, I want you to go and figure this authorization out
Yeah,
before you actually
absolutely.
put in production.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just step back. So that's actually a reason that we have been working with the OpenID Foundation and actually other identity providers on the growth of this what will eventually become a standard called IPSI, right? That's the entire reason to have IPSI, which it's a very long name for those that don't know. It's interoperability profile for secure identity in the enterprise. But the whole point of that is to say you we imagine a world where no SaaS application is directly implementing authorization or authentication logic. What it's doing is it's exposing capabilities such that a platform like Okta can handle that. Why? Because those are very specialized functions. Like if you're building an app to do, AI SDR, or you're building an app to do revenue forecasting or anything in marketing, whatever it is, any kind of SaaS app, do that. Don't implement the authorization logic because what will happen is, as a developer, it's going to be very hard to imagine all the authorization permutations. It's going to be very hard to imagine like what potential attack vectors there could be. And if you start going down that path, you're going to spend all your time building authorization instead of building your application. So the reason we want to have a standard, and in this standard, we're encapsulating things like single sign-on, like MFA, like exposing entitlements and lifecycle management. And we're also embedding into this future standard the ability to share potential risk signals and also support session termination, right? So the standard is critical because then if every app is built to the same standard, then as a CISO, you can start to get complete visibility. You have complete visibility into all apps that are plugged into your ecosystem. And if you detect a risk in one place, you can take an action like terminating the session to prevent lateral movement in some other case. That's why the standard is so critical. Now, to add to the standard, there is an important new pattern that we're seeing, which is cross-app authorization. And so that's what I meant, which is like what you don't want to have happen is in a marketing app, for example, that needs to access data or that needs to access Google Docs, for example. You don't want that app to hard code into it a whole screen that's managing, I have access to this type of data, that type of data, but in this role, I don't have access to it. That we believe should be outsourced to a centralized identity provider, right? So that way, as a security professional, you have a single control plane to see everything. Who's logging in? How are they logging in? What do they have access to? Is that access happening the right way? Are they breaking authorization patterns? But to get there, we have a very open approach. And so for us, it's very important that the standard is published and that every ISV, as we call them, is building to the common standard. So that way, there's no gaps in visibility and there's no gaps in remediation if there are security risks. Does that make sense? So we're basically saying the emerging pattern is on this cross-app authorization piece. And one last point is that becomes even more important as companies are deploying enterprise AI agents into their
Yeah, so I think we'll
ecosystem.
chat on
We'll
enterprise
get to agents,
agents.
yes.
Yeah.
We can't have a
So
podcast without talking about AI. So yes, let's
yeah,
we'll get there. Yeah.
yeah. So I think this is a very interesting piece about IPSI. So what's the
Mhm.
approximate timeline for something like that from an Okta side, and then what does it take for the customers to migrate to that?
Yeah, so we're already actively building tooling. Let me back up. There's two sides to this. There's the uh, on the builder side of things, on the ISV side of things, we already are, we have tooling, we're continuing to build tooling to make it easier for any app builder to plug in that future standard into their app so they can expose all those capabilities. And on the flip side, because it's an open standard, anyone can implement it, but we as the Okta platform, we want to be kind of the first and best reference implementation to consume the standard. So when an Okta customer turns it on, they can basically see across all their apps. They can start to see their risks. They can start to govern entitlements and lifecycle across those apps. And then they can start to execute things like universal logout in case of risk. So the ability to execute on the customer side, that's already there. That's like automatically in our platform. The part that will take longer, which is the case with any industry transformation, is to get the ISVs to start adopting that standard little by little. So now we're not waiting, right? So like there's two tracks. There is the track where we're working with OpenID Foundation. It's an open effort. We encourage everyone to go check out the IPSI stuff. We're also working with some of the biggest SaaS ISVs out there, many names that you would know, to essentially have their what we call secure identity integrations pre-built into their applications. So when they drop into a customer's instance, the Okta side lights up and we can do all those things, SSO, MFA, lifecycle, universal logout, and then eventually cross-app authorization as well. So it's like a
Got it.
two-pronged approach. So we're pushing an open standard and we're also kind of giving a adrenaline boost to the whole ecosystem. Because this is the thing that we've been doing for the last 15 years when SAML came out, was to essentially drive this like industry adoption. Those things take time because it's a behavior change, it's a code change. So we're now on the precipice of the next big change.
Yeah. So let's talk about like what the today like present, right? The status
Mhm.
quo, right? So I had seen some vendors like SSPM, SaaS to SaaS. They show this visibility and they show the proliferation of the identities, right? Like this one guy was
Mhm.
showing like people authenticating all of their apps using their Zoom ID or their Microsoft Team ID or their Google
Mhm.
like Gmail ID, right? And soon like you have so many of these apps that are uncontrollable.
Mhm.
I think two questions for you is like
Mhm.
from an Okta perspective, like do you guys actually monitor and maintain this authentication chain? And the second is like what I've heard from CISOs, like okay, they see this like really bad behavior and then they go and clean it up a bit, but then what tends to happen is some of this connection they can't really prevent it. Like for example, like Calendly sitting on top of your Gmail or sitting top of a Google Calendar, like that's like an essential functionality, right? Like you cannot really break that. For
Yeah.
that essential functionality, like does Okta actually do some kind of a monitoring observability to highlight risk, highlight any ac- um, excessive permissions or a behavior on part of this
Yeah.
on this third party app that you really cannot actually disengage from your primary app?
Yeah. So there's two parts to that. So there is a future state that we want to get to where we believe like Calendly to Gmail, like the authorization side of it should not be hard coded in those applications. It should actually be managed in a more centralized way. That's what we're basically calling cross app auth, right? So that's a future state, but that requires it's disruptive. It's disruptive, but it needs to happen. Otherwise, we're not going to satisfy the call to action that this letter was making. So that's like a future state. But even in the current state, we have so the beauty of having a single Okta platform is we have all capabilities from what you know us for, which is SSO, MFA, governance, but we have more advanced capabilities like security posture management and also threat detection response that are all fully orchestrated. So the example that you used, because we have depth of integration across thousands and thousands of applications at a very deep level, we're able to see misconfigured accounts, overprivileged accounts, excessive authorization. We're able to actually see all that in our product called ISPM actually is able to show you all that in one place. So all of your identity risks in one place. And then because ISPM is integrated into governance, which is integrated into privilege, we're able to take those remediative actions all in one place. So there is a solve for it today. My hope is that we get to a place where we don't even have to solve it because it's built the right way. But until then, we have ways of giving you visibility. So the simple way to talk about it is see it, control it, and then ongoing manage it from a governance perspective. And so overprivileged, misconfigured accounts, orphan accounts, um, also non-human service accounts, keys can all be detected in there as well that need to be brought under either privilege management or that need to be put into governance. So it's all built now in one place. Yeah.
Got it. I think one other nuance of this letter, I think
Hmm.
some folks didn't get it, is like one is just the authentication, like you talk about this Calendly and Google Calendar, right?
Hmm.
So one is just giving the tokens to Calendly to access and go on. The second one is actually the action, right? And I feel like there is a blind spot right now. Like I don't know who, like nobody seems to be covering it. Like for example, a traditional definition of ITDR is like, hey, I log into my Google or something, I look at my activity, right? So like you mentioned, like human to a app, right? But
Hmm.
this app to app activity where, hey, I did give permissions to Calendly to do so and so on my Gmail and calendar, and I think this letter touches a bit on that, is like what happens, like either Calendly misbehaves, starts having excessive permissions, having like
Hmm.
read, write, and delete, starts going and deleting my my my
Yeah.
invites,
Hmm.
like both like deliberately as well as non-deliberately, which is like, hey,
Hmm.
like Calendly got hacked and now they're attacking on me through thing. So I feel like that activity monitoring is a blind spot right now, where
Yeah.
I don't know who owns it, and
Hmm.
what is Okta's point of view on that.
Yeah, so it's actually the same comment I was making is so there's two parts to that. There's monitoring the activity, and then there's taking action to fix bad behavior. Now, that goes back to what we were talking about before we were recording, which is that is really an integrations problem. Because in order to monitor at a granular level what entitlements Calendly has, for example, over my Google Calendar, that requires a depth of integration into that application to be able to see the fine-grained entitlements. That's something that we do have. We've had fine-grained entitlements for about a year now, and that allows you to see the authorization basically check marks at a very, very deep level. But then to write into that and take action in case there's overprivilege, that also is powered by our depth of integration. That's why I come back to, I think of us as an integration depth company as much as an identity company because the action, right, the remediation is really you if you're able to take action in that app on the configuration side from a single control plane, which is Okta, that's what's powerful. And that's what we've been doing for the last many, many years. And so, yes, it is possible, but to get to the visibility and then the action, you need integrations almost into that config screen that's saying like what authorizations I have. And that's kind of the what we would say depth of integration. We have that. We have it for some of the biggest SaaS applications today. And when the standard gets adopted, it'll become de facto in every SaaS app. So that's kind of how it all kind of comes together in my head.
Right. So let's just touch a bit on the non-human identity, and we
Hmm.
don't need to get too deep into it. As you mentioned, like some of this like behavior is like machine to machine where another app
Hmm.
is accessing. So there's also machine to machine behavior like a calendar accessing, and there's
Hmm.
also like a human behavior where human is trying to access
Hmm.
something through that app, right? So on the machine to machine, you see a bunch of these vendors that have cropped up, and they some of them they're pitching visibility, saying, "Hey, I'll show you visibility to all of this machine identity." Second, the other set of companies are saying that, "Hey, you need a totally different orchestration, like a same thing like SSO, like what Okta did for humans to
Hmm.
machine. They're like machines to machines." Just curious, like, what's your point of view on that?
Yeah,
Like, does this, like, I think we're going to talk about agents, but eventually, if a lot of it goes
it's
through,
kind of connected. It's
yeah,
actually kind of connected. Like agents are gonna make bad behavior on service accounts and tokens and keys. They're gonna exacerbate that because
yep,
they are in an autonomous, unpredictable way are gonna be accessing these dangerous things. So it's like it's gonna become a snowball effect. But the whole thing about machine to machine is, you talk about the access patterns are different. It really comes down to a few things. It comes down to like, as a development organization, do you have the right discipline? Meaning, are you taking shortcuts and introducing ways in which tokens can be visible in plain text or going to be hard coded somewhere or they're shared in config files? Like, do you have the discipline to not do that? That's like basic security. Side note, I've been following a lot of like all the vibe coding stuff that's been going on. There's a very high risk if you have AI generated code that some of these tokens and things just get introduced into the code, right? So if
yep,
you don't have like a linter, an AI linter for your AI vibe code, that's going to open up a whole can of worms. So the first thing is discipline on the development side. But the access pattern is really what we know as privileged access, right? Because you do need to have tokens that exist because they're the ones that grease the skids between machine to machine, right? It's fine if they're long lived, it's fine if they have excessive privilege, as long as a random Joe Schmo doesn't just get access to it. So that access control around privilege, time-bound checkouts, rotations, vaulting, all that type of stuff that goes into PAM, that's how that discipline needs to be introduced to control those tokens. There's nothing inherently wrong with the tokens. It's the discipline around that, and it's the discipline on the developer themselves to not create potential gaps where they may be exposed. That's what is becoming more important now. It's kind of like what used to be an old problem is new again. So,
yeah.
I was an engineer a long time ago. I actually think back, I'm like, yeah, I made some of these mistakes. So it's an old problem. It's just getting a lot of limelight now. And I actually think we think that agentic AI is going to put the problem on steroids.
Yeah, so let's just get into it, right? We couldn't avoid for a long time.
Yeah, what it took
So
20 minutes to get to AI. Yeah, there we go.
yes, so with agents, we talk about the SaaS to SaaS problems, and then like one level is like agents, right? Like these are just agents that maybe you're configuring, right? And then there are these
Hmm.
autonomous agents, and then
Hmm.
also that leads to an MCP where things can
Hmm.
get compiled in real time. So these problems will keep on just growing as we try to get to more and more autonomous systems, and that's where the world seems to be heading, is this whole
Hmm.
AGI, and let's have more autonom, right? So um, let's just look at the worst case problem here is like MCP, right? Like previously, you had APIs, and it was very deliberate behavior, like, hey, I have these tokens, and I can go and authenticate, and you know what needs to be done. There was also API security around it, right? But now think of an MCP server that is bringing in like all kinds of tools, connected to all kinds of systems, and a lot of times you're not even coding it up. Like the MCP server can go and assemble these tools during real time, right? So how do you actually do identity and governance in that world, right? Because you literally need to like literally it's like assembling a plane while it's actually running in the
Yeah.
sky, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It seems difficult, but it really comes down to discipline. And so there's there's two parts to it. So there's when you're building your AI agents, and also when you're building your MCP server, like it's the same problem of saying don't don't take on the logic for authentication or authorization. Like you almost so we've already done we have our MCP server that we've put out in public. Outsource all the activities to that because your agent shouldn't have in it any hard coding to directly access stuff. It should go through the MCP server for authorization. But there's a few other things, right? We have this like four principles of basically what we call auth for Gen AI, where it comes down to like the agent should not be directly able to access any API keys. They should all be vaulted. There's fine-grained authorization needs to be baked into the agent such that it's accessing the relationship-based access control on behalf of the user that it's acting off. There's it needs to follow the same kind of SSO MFA protocols that we have for authenticating on the user's behalf. So we have a whole series of things that dictate the discipline that it takes to build agentic AI correctly. But there's a second piece, which is let's say you have agents that are being deployed in the enterprise. Then that's where cross-app auth comes in, which is the thing I was talking about earlier, where we think of it as it's another app. It should you we what we don't want to have is direct agent to agent or agent to app or agent to resource authorization. It needs to be brokered through a standard identity platform. So that way, so the whole point here is like outsource the authorization authentication logic to someone who knows what they're doing, like us. Because otherwise, it's very hard to predict what that agent is going to do. So you want to have a central control plane. So it's not a very complicated answer. It really requires discipline. And I think the biggest risk we're seeing is everyone is pumping so much stuff out there so fast. I don't even think they understand the security implications of what they're doing.
do you think that we'll have some sort of a identity spec in an agent? Like the agent will say
Mhm.
that, hey, I am when I was built, I was authorized to do so and so,
Yeah.
and then you look at that manifesto, and then you finally make the connection. I mean, you're
Yeah.
right. I think you need a third party. You cannot have this agents running rogue, right?
So the spec is yes, we're actually working on that right now. So the way I look at it is it's almost an evolution of IPSI eventually, because like here's a simple way maybe to think about it is without having an identity security standard, a company's technology stack, apps, resources, workloads, containers, AI agents, NHIs, it's like a giant pile of Legos. It's just like a dump of Legos that's sitting on a table. With a standard, imagine that large Lego plate. Then the connecting point between the Lego and the plate is the standard, because then you're exposing all the core capabilities, SSO, MFA, lifecycle, entitlements, universal logout, risk signal sharing, cross-app authorization. All those are basically hooks that get exposed. And once it drops onto the Lego plate, suddenly it lights up and it says, "Hi, I'm here. I can be managed. Here's what I'm accessing. Please control me." And then the plate is a unified identity security platform that's controlling all those little Legos. So that's the vision that we have. That's why we want to make sure the standard is adopted by everybody. And so in our mind, like agentic AI, it's very cool, but the core identity security principles are the same, right? Like, do not hard code anything. Make sure you're exposing yourself to a central platform. And the manifesto you talked about is really, if it adheres to the standard, that is the manifesto. So it's hopefully that makes sense. But I like to think in Legos because like I have this giant pile of garbage Legos, and suddenly I'm able to organize it all and see everything.
And what do you think of like the orchestration piece of this,
Hmm.
right? Like right now, like if you just go back like 10 years ago, right? Like that's the SSO orchestration, right? Like
Hmm.
I'm connecting to a Salesforce. It's like a one-time thing, and the tokens
Hmm.
are like alive for some time, and then they disappear, right? But in agents, some of these agents will be like very short-lived, like microservices, right? They'll come and go. How do you actually orchestrate identities at such like time scale and I mean, I don't think it needs to be fast. I think we need to get it right,
Hmm.
but you need to insert yourself in between bunch of these agents
Yeah.
working on it. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's the same. It's kind of like a follow on from everything I've been saying, which is once it's built to a standard, once the right discipline is introduced, meaning there's no direct access, tokens are vaulted and protected and have like governance and checkout process associated with it, then the central platform can orchestrate all the actions. If you see a violation of policy, that becomes a signal that can promote an action to happen by the IT team or the security team. If you see a potential anomalous activity on a token, that can then trigger potentially like eliminating the session that's there to prevent the lateral movement. So orchestration is just a byproduct of having everything built to a standard sitting on top of a single platform. Like it's like in that Lego analogy, right? Once all the Legos are in there, they all light up, and you're sharing signals between them. If you see a bad behavior, you can take action right away. But if everything is siloed and everything is disconnected and everything is like, it doesn't have the same standard, that is where you have the cracks and the orchestration is not possible.
got it. I was actually trying to highlight, like if you look at Zscaler, right? So
Yeah.
everybody accesses their SaaS apps to Zscaler, and when Zscaler is down, you just cannot access, right? So
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of a scenario where you have a bunch of
Same
these
same with
agents,
us.
and
When we're down, most companies are in big trouble. So we try to not be. That's not
yeah,
something we try to do at all. Yeah.
yeah. So I was thinking like even the problem becomes even worse during agents, right? Because you
Hmm.
need like 99 point like 99 times up availability of
Yeah,
mock
four or
test
five nines
service.
uptime. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Is that something that you guys are worried about working on it to maybe create a much better cloud service with like low latency
We
and
already have that. So we
yeah,
are we're we have some of the best kind of both scalability but also reliability uptime in the business, because we're mission critical, right? Agents or no agents, from day one, the fact is, once you move to a central IDP, we become the thing, the gatekeeper to get access to people. So the experience becomes easy, but the criticality goes up. And so, yes, there is not a day that goes by where we're not mission critical. So it's the same example I used for Zscaler. Yeah, we have pretty high record uptime, record scalability, global availability. We have all that stuff. So it's not something we need to think about. It's something we're already doing. It's kind of a non-negotiable.
got it. I'm just curious, like, once this letter came out during
Hmm.
RSA, as you mentioned that, everybody's
Hmm.
talking about it. And what has been like Okta's official response? I know you
Yeah.
posted something, but what has been like what should
Yeah.
this gentleman do right now to sleep better?
Yeah, I think so. A couple of things. Speaking about the gentleman, he should be he should have some peace of mind that we are doing everything we can to move the industry in the direction of standards. So, quick thing. For example, we're going to be at SaaStr later this month. We're doing a bunch of sessions to essentially convince all the SaaS builders there that like doesn't matter how cool your app is, if you're not conforming to an identity security standard, these guys are not going to buy you. And so
Yeah.
like it's in your best interest to embed identity security from authorization all the way authentication all the way to authorization. You need to embed that into your app from day zero, otherwise you're dead in the water. So we're trying to make a lot of noise about that in the industry, because it's not even in self-interest. It's just the right thing to do for our customers and for the industry. And then the other thing is we have a set of capabilities really around cross app auth. So stay tuned for that. We're actually going to be doing some events and a lot of like specs and updated standards coming out really in the June July timeframe. So we were already on it, and this just kind of gave us more fuel to the fire. So that's why I was very happy to read this, because I was like, thank you for validating kind of what we have already been seeing. But it was really good to hear it in his own words. And honestly, the fact that it's from an industry that you could argue, well, it's finance, they're kind of they're not at the cutting edge. No, these guys actually are, because
Yeah.
they're moving $1 trillion a day in payments, and for them, every single security risk can like essentially blow up the world. So we're very happy this came out. he can rest assured that we are on this. We're trying to bring the whole industry with us, and our there's an ideal world that we want to create where, for him, he will have visibility into every SaaS application. He can rest assured that no one is directly accessing each other, and that he has ultimate control over what happens in his ecosystem. So that's the utopia we're pushing for, and we believe in it. We're going to make it happen. And if any ISVs are watching this, standards, build to standards, please. Otherwise, your long-term viability is going to be in question.
Great. That's a good way to end
Yeah,
this podcast.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, real pleasure having you. Having you. I
Thank
think
you.
we clarified a lot of things here. Would love to chat more in future, but
Yeah.
best of luck. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.